It's being recorded, yes.
All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order for the September 25th, 2019 capital budget meeting for Portland. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest? No, seeing none. All right, and I guess we'll hand the floor over to the Director of Finance, Mary Hassan, for her report.
Okay, so I'm just going to discuss the report just at a high level, and at the end, I would welcome any questions that you may have. And so a lot of the report is tying in the policy decisions and the policy recommendations that came out of the asset management plan. And so I'll just quickly summarize it. So the current tax levy impact, I'm on page 3 of 117 of the agenda, is that for every, based on the returned assessment roll that we received in 2019, each additional $40,000 of taxes levied results in a 1% tax rate increase for the township portion of taxes. Currently, Councillor Goyda, thanks for catching this. So the 2019 approved capital budget was approximately $1.1 million. The 2020 proposed capital budget, currently over there in the report, it says 2019 proposed capital budget, but it should say 2020 proposed capital budget is currently noted at $1.2 million, which is a $100,000 difference, and an estimated tax rate impact of 2.5%. But again, this doesn't include assessment growth, which we will be getting the returned assessment roll from MPAC in December, and so we will incorporate all of that as well prior to going to the public meeting in January. So the next table just summarizes the items in the capital budget that are currently tax levy funded, a portion of them. So the first item is the marketing and branding implementation phase 2. And so you'll see that a small portion of it is funded through tax levy at $6,000, and then the remainder is through grant funding. So the County of Wellington BRNE grant of $25,000 that the township applies for on a yearly basis. And also the Rural Economic Development Grant for $24,000. So the township recently applied for updating some of the signage in the non-Main Street area. As you may recall, in 2019, we received grant funding for updating the signage in the Main Street area as identified in our community improvement plan. So we recently applied to that program. The next item is a reserve contribution of approximately $1.2 million into the asset management discretionary reserve. The next item is a reserve contribution of $10,000 into the corporate information technology reserve. As you may recall that through the implementation of Bill 108, which is estimated to take in effective January 1st, 2021, the township will be required to develop a community benefits charge strategy and to amend our development charges bylaw to take out, to remove soft services so they are in a community benefits charge strategy. And so a small portion of that is tax levy funded. Currently, it's noted that the remaining portion would be development charge funded, but I have received confirmation from our development charge consultant, Watson and Associates, that a portion of that cost could be funded from the Community Benefits Charge Reserve Fund, which would be established through this process. So that will be updated in the next version of the capital budget. The next item is a building condition assessment, arc flash study, and infrared scanning of equipment. And so that was identified through the asset management plan, and it was identified that this should be done through our building condition assessment reports that were done in 2014. And so we're recommending that this be done for the municipal office, the ORC, and the Puslinch Community Center. For public works, the bridge and culvert inspections, we budget an amount of $7,500 on a yearly basis so that it's not one hit in a given year. And so the next time that we have to do the bridge and culvert inspection report is in 2021. You would have received the 2019 report just recently this year. The next item is a traffic count study as identified in the asset management plan to help us. Our asset management plan had traffic counts, but they were estimated for a majority of the roads. But this will assist through our the work that we're doing through our gravel road study, and also it was identified in our development charges study and our asset management plan. So the next table identifies the discretionary reserves and how much we have contributed to these reserves over the past few years. So you'll see in 2020 that the amount is higher than previous years, and I can explain this more to everyone here. So in the past, for our asset replacements, a significant portion of them was funded through tax levy. And so now what's recommended, and this was recommended in the asset management plan, is that asset replacements be funded through our asset management discretionary reserve that we have, that I've recommended be consolidated, and that anything else, for example, a new asset or a study or a plan or contributions to discretionary reserves be funded through tax levy. And it gives a better picture, and it also allows us to understand how much we should be contributing to our asset management discretionary reserve to address our asset replacement requirements year over year. So I give a little bit of history regarding, the establishment and maintaining of discretionary reserves. And so we passed a bylaw in 2015 where we established various reserves. And one of the items that came out of our 2019 asset management plan was to review and update the budget allocations to our reserves. And so some of the next few items that will be discussed are based on some of those recommendations. So I've attached a proposed bylaw for establishing and defining our discretionary reserves as Schedule E. And the next portion just talks about all of our itemized reserves that we had in the past for asset replacement requirements on a departmental basis. And as you can see in this table, that it's recommended that the total current balance in those reserves be consolidated to the asset management discretionary reserve, which also has a current balance of approximately $1 million, and it all be consolidated into one reserve. In here, I've identified what the projected balance is as of December 31st, 2020, based on the 2020 projects that you see before you through this budget process. And so it also includes the contributions to the discretionary reserve based on what's been recommended. And so the total projected balance is $2.4 million, and that's in line with what was recommended in the asset management plan, which was to maintain a minimum target balance of $2 million and a maximum target balance of $4 million. So on page 6 of 117, it discusses Council Resolution 2013-284, which developed a policy regarding annual surplus allocations to discretionary reserves. And so this is how, in the past, we've allocated based on these percentages. And so what's been recommended based on Council's direction and the asset management plan that was completed is that all future budget surpluses commencing in 2019 be allocated to the asset management discretionary reserve for the purpose of meeting future asset management obligations of the township. That's what's recommended before you. So you'll note that there's a separate reserve as well about corporate information technology. So this isn't really asset replacement, so I felt that this was a little bit different than the asset replacement reserve. And so it includes implementing some of the recommendations that will come out of the services efficiency review for implementing some automation initiatives and hopefully a lot of the recommendations that come out of KPMG's report, which I'm under the impression that a lot of it will have to do with information technology initiatives and doing things in a coordinated manner amongst the County of Wellington and the lower tier municipalities. So the next reserves are, it's recommended that they continue in accordance with their current purpose. So a lot of these reserves are not, they don't categorize under asset replacement or information technology. And so those reserves and their purpose are included in this table, and they're also defined in the bylaw that's been attached to this report. So page 8 of 117 discusses the cash in lieu of parkland amounts that have been collected from 2013 to 2019. And as has been done in the past through the budget process, you will be receiving the projected balances in the discretionary and restricted reserves prior to budget approval. So this table just discusses what is our current balance and what projects are coming forward in 2019 or 2020 that may decrease the balance, and also an estimate of funds to be received. And so the same type of information is provided for development charges. And so all of the balances are currently showing as a positive balance except for the administrative studies development charge reserve. And that will change based on the information that I just got from our consultant, in that a portion of the costs associated with the community benefits charge strategy can be funded from a community benefits restricted reserve, which would be developed through this process. So on page 10 of 117, it just discusses our major known capital grant funding on a year-over-year basis. And so for the gas tax funding, we received correspondence in 2019 regarding that we should likely not expect an increase in gas tax funding that we had previously received information on. So the gas tax funding is currently just showing the same as 2019 amounts. In 2019, we also received a top-up allocation, so that's where you're seeing more gas tax funding being utilized in the 2020 proposed budget in public works projects. It's double the amount that you would usually see, and it's because we received a top-up allocation, a one-time top-up amount in 2019 for the gas tax fund. And so also the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, the formula-based funding that we've received in the past, I've only assumed an amount for 2020 because we did receive correspondence from the ministry that they are reviewing this funding, and we're not sure at this point if it will continue. So we're hoping that prior to budget approval, we'll know whether or not we're going to get the 2020 funding allocation that's been budgeted as part of our capital budget for a public works project. Page 11 just discusses aggregate levy revenue. And so as done in the previous year, it's recommended that half of those funds, half of that estimated fund, be utilized for public works capital projects. So there's some discussion in here regarding pavement condition indexes, and as you may recall, the asset management plan recommended that different classes of roads be paved at different PCI levels. So class 3 roads at PCI of 65 and class 4 and 5 roads at PCI of 60. But there are also other factors involved in determining whether or not a road has a priority to be repaved. So that information is just included in here. And also the township's capital forecast is prepared taking into consideration many different inputs. So they're just listed here: the 2019 development charges study, the 2019 energy conservation and demand management plan, the 2015 recreation and parks master plan, the parks master plan and recommended phasing for the Puslinch Community Center Park, the master fire plan, the Ontario Structure Inspection Manual reports, and the asset management plan. So the next items just discuss how the capital budget has changed year over year and what the proposed capital budget is of $4.5 million. And how that's funded. You'll also notice that the 10-year plan has increased from 2019, and that's because we have incorporated the whole 2019 asset management plan that we've done to make sure that it's reviewed as part of the budget process. So the 10-year plan in the 2020 capital budget and forecast results in a total funds to be spent of approximately 40 million and a yearly average of 4 million. Okay, so that's my summary, and if anyone has any questions, I'd be...
I apologize, Mr. Mayor. I should have I made just a couple of comments before Mary went through her presentation on, again, just to remind everybody that's watching a little bit about the budget process this year, and there's been some adjustments to the schedule and the process. The first of which is really today's meeting, which for the most part is going to be a workshop. And my observation basically is that we are very good at cataloging a lot of material and doing spreadsheets and forwarding several hundred pages of material for you to read over a weekend. And while that's useful and it's good backup, and that's the traditional way of doing things, we thought this year it would be a greater benefit perhaps to allow council the opportunity to understand and see directly what's being proposed by staff. So later on today, there will be a walkabout at the fire station next door to understand and see what the fire department is recommending in terms of its capital budget requests. And then following that, there will be a presentation or a walkabout in the public works area to get a sense of what's being proposed as well. And it might even be useful because the budget ultimately is going to be struck in February or perhaps January if MPAC gets their numbers into us. It may make sense, subject to your approval, of doing a little road tour, maybe getting a bus and getting members of council out throughout the townships where you can actually see some of the capital works that are being proposed. And so when residents are asking you why is money being spent in a particular area, you can actually see with your own eyes what's being proposed and speak to a project because you've seen it and understand it, and it helps you make better decisions. The second thing I wanted to comment on is I've been doing this for 35 years. I've seen how finance people put budgets together and present them to you. Rarely have I seen a budget document that ties in a lot of previously approved council policies and built them into a budget. So typically what a municipality will do is a Parks and Recreation Master Plan or a Roads and Needs Study or whatever, and the plan is approved subject to financing. But we never talk about the subject of financing, we just approve the fact that we're going to have this plan. I was really pleasantly surprised to see how staff have taken those documents and actually built them into your budget. So you have a 10-year capital forecast, you have an asset management plan, and those decisions that have been made in those documents are brought forward in the context of your plan on an annual basis. And it's the level of sophistication that I've seen in how you do it here is quite remarkable because typical municipalities have an entire budget department that work nothing but budgets. I don't know how you do that because they claim it's an annual exercise, but there's usually 8 people beavering away trying to do what one person has done and with the senior staff in a short period of time. The budget basically is also built on a bunch of assumptions as well. So the only 2 things that you're being asked to consider today is how to treat the discretionary reserves, because the reserves basically are an input into the budget process as to how to finance things, and also how to allocate surpluses. And so if we get decision points on those 2 policy issues, it helps inform how the rest of the piece fits together. That's not to say that that an adjustment couldn't be made as you get more information and as you go through the budget process, but at least if it gives us some clue as to whether we're on the right track, that would be helpful. So again, really today is your day. It's your opportunity to hear what's being proposed, get information in a fairly informal and workshop manner. Staff will take that back as feedback. The idea is that when we have the next meeting on October the 23rd, there'll be the proposed operating budget, but also a discussion on the capital budget, because you'll have some more time to think about it. And the final decision point is going to be made I'm hoping in January as opposed to February, once you have the impact numbers in. So we don't want you to feel pressured about making decisions today. This is really about trying to get a couple of pieces of assumptions built into the budget, then to allow staff to continue to work the numbers, and also get your feedback on what's being proposed by the department heads.
Thank you. Mary did an excellent job. It was very rewarding, very easy to read and easy to understand, and I know you work very hard on these projects, and we're very fortunate to have you. So I'll open up to council to questions for you.
I echo your sentiments. Mary, you did a good job.
Thank you.
Okay, first question I have is with respect to the 1166,966 number. How was that derived? Like, what did you use as a rationale?
So I did utilize the asset management plan, which provided some guidelines as to what is a healthy balance in that reserve between the 2 million and the 4 million. And also, I did utilize the asset management plan, which indicated that we do have a deficit, funding deficit moving forward as it relates to the replacement of our assets. So I think the more that we can contribute to that reserve, as we have a lot of aging assets and infrastructure that needs to be replaced, I think it helps us to be in a better position moving forward.
So when you present us the amounts in the reserves, we'll have an idea about how much we need to borrow in the future years?
Exactly, because then you will be able to see the whole picture, and you'll be able to see how the capital budget and forecast will impact the reserve balances moving forward, so.
Okay. I'm in favor of the consolidation of the reserves into one asset management reserve. I have a question for the CEO. What's his opinion of this approach?
What it does from a staff perspective, it helps break down silos, because if I know in some places you segregate the reserves into various departments, and then at budget time it becomes a competition. And they think this is my money. Well, it's not their money, it's the taxpayers' money. It's your money. It's a consolidated pot. So it creates, and I found it creates an opportunity for breaking down silos, and also having the entire, your senior management team be united about what a budget proposal should look like. Because the moment that you assign something to a particular department, the thinking can become siloed. So the notion that because you have an asset management plan, which is corporate, it's for everything. You don't have an asset management plan for fire or for computers or for public works. It's all one pot of money. And so that's sort of the soft benefit, is that it creates more of a team approach to how things are being done. And it's also recognizing that this is the taxpayers' money, and you're the council responsible for overseeing the budget, and there will be natural priorities that are going to develop about how you utilize that reserve, and it'll be based hopefully on policy, and also council's direction and decision. So this seems to be the approach that's being used. The province is requiring municipalities to have separate funds for the building department, and the reason for that is it is supposed to be generating enough revenue for capital and operating to run its business. So you can't make a profit, but you are allowed to basically segregate that, keep a surplus to essentially keep the operation running in the event that there was no construction activity. Because it's difficult to find and maintain staff in that resource. So that's separate. If you had sewer and water, you'd be required to have it in a separate reserve fund, because it's run like a utility, but you don't have that function. And I think those are the only two where it's specified that you have to have specified reserves.
One last question. You have a paragraph in there on the soccer field. Is there intent to bring forward the status where we stand on this? I know we went out to tender. I don't know where we stand on that as well.
Maybe Mike can answer that.
Actually, I need some help, Mary. I wasn't here that day when the tender was awarded.
So the tender has not been awarded yet. We will have to report to council. As you may recall, in the 2019 budget, it was proposed that it be contingent on receiving grant funding. And so we have received some information about grant funding that's available. The deadline to apply is in November. And so that'll work perfectly. We will report back to you regarding the soccer fields prior to budget approval as well.
Okay, great. That's all the general questions I've got. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Roth? I'm good. Councillor Goyda?
I'm sorry. The one question I had is you talked about the MPAC growth and the number, is working? The estimated tax rate impact currently is proposed at 2.5. Once that MPAC assessment is done, and maybe it varies every year, but does that rate impact typically go down based on that MPAC assessment?
So that's a good question. So once we get the MPAC assessment, we also factor in how the median single-family detached dwelling in the township its assessment has increased. And so once we factor all of that in, it could potentially make that number go down.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I also am in favor of grouping all of the reserves into one asset management plan. I like that word united, I think, and you mentioned it allows us to look at things more corporately and collaboratively, and I would be in favor of that.
Thank you. Mary, you spoke of funding being available, I think it closes November 4th, but for the soccer field, do we not apply for federal funding, and that was what was contingent on the soccer field?
Yeah, so the federal funding announcement was recently made, and so the deadline to apply for that is in November.
Oh, I thought you were making reference to the provincial program that was announced at AMO.
So it's a federal and provincial collaborative program.
Okay,
Yeah, so it's the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Fund.
okay. All right.
I'm assuming it's the same program.
And
Yep.
the Parkland Dedication Reserve, will that be amalgamated into the asset management plan, or will that, the cash in lieu, it'll still be separate? Until
Cash in lieu is a restricted reserve as per the Planning Act, so
Okay, good.
yes, that'll be separate. Same with the federal gas tax rebate reserve, which is required to be restricted as well.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions. All right. So we have a motion here to receive the report. Moved by Councillor Goyda, seconded by Councillor Spillis, that report FIN 2019-030 regarding the 2020 proposed capital budget be received, and the council established and defined discretionary reserves in accordance with the bylaw attached to Schedule E to report finance 2019-030, and the council allocate all budget surpluses to the Township Asset Management Discretionary Reserve for the purpose of meeting future asset management obligations. Any questions or comments on that? It's on the, you didn't mention anything about the discretionary reserves.
Yeah, I just wondered, do we need a motion with respect to the approval of the consolidation?
That's in here.
So I think that's what, when we're, my understanding is when we're talking about the consolidation, we're basically saying at the end of the year, if you have an overall surplus in the municipality, that those funds are going to be allocated
Okay,
to the asset management, meeting your asset management obligations. Is that correct?
Right. And Councillor Sapoulis, to answer your question, the bylaw has it
Yeah,
consolidated,
no, I
so.
just, the mayor just pointed it out to me,
Yeah.
so that was a gap.
Excellent.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on that? Okay, all in favor? Carried. Do you have a pen? Move away the pen. All right, are we going to go for our tour now, or?
Yes, we'll have a movable council meeting. So I guess technically it's still a council meeting, but you will be next door. And at that point in time, I think the chief will be giving you just an overview of what he is recommending, and then it's an opportunity to ask questions. We'll be returning back here after that, hopefully in about 45 minutes or so, going into the Public Works area, looking at some of the areas in that area, and then come back to and continue on the meeting. So it's essentially a extension of it's a mobile council meeting / recess / workshop.
Perfect. All right, we'll meet over next door. Thank you.